Hello YouTubers. If you own a PPV, a people powered vehicle from the 70s or even a later version, you know it's a pretty small world out there as far as information, especially upgrades when it comes to converting them to e-bikes. But it's very possible, and we know that there's some who've done it. There's a Facebook group that has shown some information. There's a couple of different ways that it's been done. Front wheel, rear wheel. I just did this with a front wheel, and going through this process I had a lot of questions, and I'm sure there are a lot of the same questions that you have. In my first e-bike conversion I had even more than someone who's done that before. So I'd like to go through that and give you some of the facts and show you what I've used and how it worked out, and hopefully that'll help you. I know it's a small world and this is a small audience, but if you're watching and you've got a PPV that you want to convert, stay tuned. My question started with, what wheel should I get? How much power should it have? That's my cat Tougher, by the way. You'll see her around. What's involved in the controller? What size battery should I get? Where do I get it from? There's so little information other than YouTube videos that I really wasn't sure what to get. And I looked on the Facebook group for the EVI PPV and got some ideas there. Had some idea of what I was looking for. And I also looked at YouTube videos that were mostly for standard bicycles. And I found some that were specific to controllers, some that were specific to wheels, and some that were specific to batteries and mounting. So I really had to explore all those worlds, basically 3 worlds. I was looking for a kit, some magical kit that had everything in it so I wouldn't have to think too much about it. I could just get it, plug it all together, and the wheel would spin, and I'd just have to mount everything. That didn't happen. I found a wheel and controller kit and bought a battery separately, but when it came to shipping the wheel and controller kit from China, they had some problems and ended up canceling the order. So I went to looking for the components, breaking it down a little bit more. I'd learned a bit more by then. So I found it's easiest to order, find out what you're looking for, which I'm going to help you with. Order the battery, order the hub motor, which is the wheel with the hub motor in it, the drive motor, and order a control kit that has as many of the components as you want in it as you can get, because that's usually a good way to package it. And then buy the other components separately. They're not that expensive. You could even break it down to buying a controller, a throttle, PAS, which is a pedal assist sensor. You could break it down even more, but they have some pretty good kits out there that'll have maybe everything you want, or you think you want, or at least the bulk of it, and then you can add on. The connectors are on the controller. We'll get into more of that later. So I started out thinking I wanted a 600 watt wheel because I had seen a video of another guy that had a 600 watt wheel and it was moving along pretty good. I found a 500 watt 48 volt wheel and had that kit ordered. That's the kit they couldn't ship. So I went looking again. I found that I could get all those parts if I just ordered the things separately, and I could get a 1000 watt 48 volt wheel, and it all came out to a little less than the whole package. So I thought, well, I can always just not throttle it as much. What's it going to hurt to have a little more power? So I ordered the 1000 watt wheel, figuring my wife and I are going to ride in here. It's usually going to be 2 people. PPV is not light to start with. Why not have plenty of power? If they'll put that on a scooter or a bike, no reason why it won't work on a PPV. So I went ahead and ordered that stuff. Some of it from Amazon, some of it from eBay. So I'm going to show you what I ordered and take you through the components. We're going to lift the hood off, show you what's under the hood. Alright, here it is. Under the hood, I've got a 10 amp hour 48 volt battery pack. There are other voltages out there. There's 36 volt and there's 60 volt. I don't know anything about them. I know others were using 48 volts. That's why I went with that. You can see there it says 48 volts. It's a little less than 11 inches long, about 3.5 inches wide, about 2 inches high. Then there's the controller. The controller came as a kit. It included the display, which here's the display that came with this one. There are different displays, and this control right here, which changes the settings on the display. It came with a thumb throttle. I did not get brake switches with it. I had to order them separately. But all of those connectors, with any of these, you get all these connections. Here's your main battery connection, and here is your hall sensor to the motor. That communicates back to the controller how fast your motor is spinning. And then also from the motor are these 3 wires, these phase wires, blue, green, and yellow. That's very typical. And then going into the controller, blue, green, and yellow. This terminal strip is temporary. I have a nicer one coming from China that's just three connectors with a cover, but it didn't get here in time for this video. So I went ahead and set it up with this janky terminal strip. This is for a light. You can get a light kit that'll have a headlight, tail light, turn signals, all sorts of stuff available. Here's your connections for the throttle and the control. I ordered brake levers that have switches in them. What that does is that turns off the motor, kills the power to the motor when you pull the brake. Something you kind of want if you got the throttle held or something's holding it. And that also has plug-ins. There's going to be extra plug-ins that maybe you won't use, or maybe you'll buy the accessories later. Here's another brake plug-in. I can have 2 brake handles set up for front and rear. I only used one. There's the controller. Oh, also on the battery, besides the black and red, is a charge port. Most batteries will be packaged with a charger. Go ahead and get it that way so you got the correct charger. I'm probably going to mount that in here and run the cord out somewhere where I can just plug into it while the hood's on and not have to reach up in here, of course. There's those components. That's the battery, the controller, the display, and you can change your settings here. We'll get into more of that later. Now let me flip it up and show you the wheel and what's involved in mounting that. Oh, sorry, Tucker. Didn't see you under there. Lucky I haven't run her over yet. She's always getting under something. Alright, here's the 16-inch hub motor. Now this 16-inch uses a 16 by 2.5 tire. This one came with the wheel. Now do not make the mistake of ordering a motorcycle tire, because this right here is a 16-inch motorcycle tire. Yes, it's a much bigger rim, and it's actually a 16-inch rim. With bicycle tires, even these scooter tires, they go by the outside, not the rim size. So that's the size tire you're going to want if your hub motor doesn't come with a tire. 16 by 2.5. These I believe are 16 by 2.15. but a motorcycle tire. So don't get caught up in that. I made the mistake of ordering the wrong tire for my stock rim, but luckily it'll fit these rears, so I ordered another, and I've got some new tires to mount on these. This hub motor did not come with a disc brake, but it did come with provisions to mount it. Came with the bolts and the spacer, so I had to order a brake kit. So I ordered a kit that included 2 discs, 2 cable operated calipers. I guess you could order hydraulic, it doesn't really matter. And it comes with the levers, but I ended up buying another set of levers that have the switches in them for the e-bike controls. So I won't be using the levers that came with this kit. But this whole kit was so cheap. I think it was about $23 for all of that. So now I've got a spare caliper with spare shoes and a spare disc, or I could use it on another bike. It came with 2 different length cables. I ended up using the longer of the 2 cables. So you'll need a rear brake cable, and I had to cut it down. Had to cut the housing once I got the length set, and then cut off the excess inner cable. There are little dress up deals that go on the ends of here. I haven't put them on yet. I haven't done all my finish up work. But the disc mounts right to the hub. Not a big deal, it just bolts right on. But the caliper, you're wondering how I got that on there. So this plate right here, this mounting plate, was part of a bolt-on or clamp-on disc brake kit. And it comes in pairs, and it had a clamp on one end, and the other end had a hook that would go over the axle on a bicycle fork. The other part had a clamp that would go around the fork. So I bought those clamp-on disc brake brackets. I trimmed off I unbolted the clamp, trimmed off the other piece, held it up here where I needed it, clamped the brake in place, bolted the plate, lined it up, and I welded it on. But if you can't weld, you could drill holes, and there's already one hole there. You could drill through the fork, and you could drill another hole out here and bolt it on. I don't see why that wouldn't work. There's enough room for a bolt head in the back. And that was probably the most tedious thing. I end up with this adjuster that, for some reason, if you can see it right here, right there, that plastic adjuster is right at the hub. It looks like it's touching, but I don't think it is. But I took my grinder and I knocked off a little plastic just to make sure it doesn't. That's some sort of an adjustment for the shoes. But it doesn't rub, so I'm not going to worry about it. You know, maybe the calipers you order won't have that problem. But the only thing you hear when I turn that is the brake pads. And then the cable routes out through the original hole through the tub. Then on the other side, since it's a 1,000-watt wheel and it's got a lot of power, I took the original washer. You'll see it here. This washer that has a little tooth on it that catches in the fork. I didn't trust that not to spin. If this ever came loose a little bit, I think that would skip over, and if that axle ever spins, these wires are toast, and there's no telling what it might do. It might short, cause a fire, who knows. So I didn't want that axle to spin, and I've seen other videos warning about making a torque arm. What this is I welded that washer inside of a bigger washer, and then I welded key stock, square key stock. You can kind of see it fits up against the outside of the fork, so I don't have to worry about that fork end spreading, and it locks it in. You can also, you may be able to buy or make a piece that goes over this axle shape that will come up along the arm and clamp. Just something that keeps that axle from spinning around if it ever got loose. Have no problem with clearance. This is a bigger tire than the stock tire. They didn't have very big tires back in the 70s. The front tire was always a little underrated for what it was doing, but they did the best they could. This is a very beefy tire, as you can see. I got pretty big hands, but that's a big tire. Okay, PAS sensor. PAS stands for pedal assist sensor. So I guess I should just say PAS, not PAS sensor. It's like saying MLB baseball. All right, that consists of magnets in a ring and a pickup. And what they normally do is you'll put this bracket, and you can't see it now, it's a metal bracket with a hole in it that normally would go on the bottom bracket of a bicycle where the pedals come through. And then it has this sensor and a wire coming out. And then this piece pushes onto the shaft. It's got little fingers around the inside hole that expand out as you push it onto the shaft. So it's a very tight fit on there. It's just pushed on, but it's very tight. It stays in place. Well, this is made to go underneath of a nut on the bottom bracket, and that's how it's held in place. We don't have that on the PPV, and that's what's different. What that does is when you pedal and that spins, it tells the controller that you're pedaling, and it makes the motor kick in to whatever level you have it set at, usually 1 through 5. So at level 1, the slowest setting, you start pedaling, it'll kick in and it'll help you out a little bit. You can go along slowly, but it'll help you up grades, and you'll feel that torque kick in. And level 5, you'll feel it kick in and really take off. So as long as you're pedaling, the motor may overrun your pedaling, but you just keep on pedaling to make it keep going. So if you were to put that on the one side, like the driver's side, if you were to try to mount that ring over here, you see that gives. That's going to float around with weight in the tub or feet kicking it. If you were to mount this piece over here, you would only get reaction from the driver's side if the driver was pedaling. Same thing over here. If the passenger side was the only side with that, you'd only get it from the passenger side. I guess you could put 2 in parallel. I didn't want to get into all that. I thought most ideal is right here is the center shaft that is independent of this freewheel and this freewheel. So what I did was unpin this clevis, pull the pedal shaft out so it would fall down. Same thing here, unpin that clevis, pull the pedal shaft out that way. Then unpin this clevis, pull this assembly, take the chain off, pull this assembly to the side. And I didn't have to take it out, I just pulled it off of the shaft. Same thing here, this inside clevis, and pulled that assembly and pulled that out completely. Then you can take this center shaft and slide it out. I was able to slide it out this way and completely remove it, clean it up. Then I cleaned this bearing. There are bearings that press in through this steel bracket. It's a flanged bearing, and when it comes through, there's a little bit of a shoulder, and then the bearing protrudes through the shoulder a little bit. That ring on that bracket just fits over that bearing and sits against that shoulder. But there's no way to hold it. Also, the bracket itself, I'll try to get you in there so you can see it. The original bracket was like this, and it was in the way of this part. So I had to get in here with a grinder and a cutoff wheel and trim that and keep trimming that away until I could get that sensor in there so it would drop onto the bearing and just miss all of this. Then I cleaned it all with brake cleaner. I wiped down the sensor, laid it aside, and I got in there and cleaned away years of grease and got down to bare metal. And I have an industrial hot glue gun, and I just hot glued it. There's probably tons of different glues you could use. I couldn't come up with a better way to make a bracket to hold it, but it's working fine. It's in there nice and solid. And then as I put the shaft back in, I had to work this part onto it. One thing that was key is I had to take a grinder and I had to taper the end of the shaft because it was very blunt and it wouldn't start into this part. And once I tapered it, I was able to work it on, and it was a very tight fit. It was a pretty good fight. Slowly worked it in place, got it about middle ways, reassembled everything, and then with everything reassembled, it doesn't move side to side very much, so I moved it as close as I could get it to the sensor without any risk of it hitting this bracket. I considered cutting away the bracket, trimming it back some, but I didn't want to do that unless I had to, and I didn't have to. You can see there's a pretty good gap between the sensor and the magnet, and it still works just fine. So now it's on the center shaft. No matter who's pedaling, the pedal assist sensor operates and it kicks in the motor. So that's ideally where you want it on a PPV. And there's a couple more things I had to do. This clevis pin that comes through here would have hit this sensor, because this is a long pin and these out here are short pins. The short pin wasn't long enough to go through here, so I had to re-drill this pin and then cut off the excess, and you can see about how much it pokes through. And I put the hairpin clip on the outside, and now it misses. It totally misses that sensor as it goes around. I also had to make sure that the wire dropped out and came right around close. I brought it down and I tied it to this bolt down here with a tie wrap, and then I went under the bolt and upward out the top, and another tie wrap, and then fed it up through and out through a hole that I cut with a hole saw to feed the motor wire and the PAS sensor wire through. So the motor wire runs up along the fork, and I have a loop in it around here because I don't want it to rub up against any metal. So I looped it and tied it again, and I made sure it has enough play in it, a little bit of a loop there, and tied it to the frame. This other thing you see here, this is the brake cable. So there's enough play that it won't get in a bind and it won't fatigue over time. And it passes, it's held to the frame so it can't drop down, and it passes up through the hole. Then on this side, where it comes through the hole, I've got some excess looped up around the controller, and it comes in here. So these phase wires that we talked about, and it meets the phase wires from the controller on the other side of the terminal block. Everything is kept up here in the front of the PPV, out of sight. I considered putting the battery down in this section so I could pull it out and replace it. There are batteries that mount to a track, that you mount the track on your bicycle frame, and then you mount the battery to that. It's got a key lock that you can unlock it, slide it off of there. They've got a power switch built in. That would be a nice setup if they're skinny enough. I think they are, but they were kind of pricey, so I went cheap. And then what I did was I went to Harbor Freight and I bought their cheapest ammo box, a plastic ammo box. It cost $5.99 on sale, I think. Of course, everything's always on sale at Harbor Freight. And I just used a bottom section of it. I'll put a picture in here to show you. And that made a tray that I could screw down. It would support the weight, and it's an excellent fit. I just cut it out with a reciprocating saw. I put one huge cable tie around it to keep it from coming out this way when I stand the PPV up, and then made holes in the tub to have one going around. It's that simple. You can make brackets, you can make a box, you can order a box to put it in that would mount there's different ways. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you. The controller, I just put a screw in here and another screw up in here. 2 screws is plenty to hold it. They're self drillers. They're a little sharp on the bottom, but it's not a place I normally touch, so I'm not really worried about it. It was getting late in the day and I was like, you know what, zap zap, it's done. Where I ran cables along the steering, the parts that go to the handlebar, I ran them along the steering rod. Put a loop there so it stays away from this pivot, and then this part should be hanging down, which I didn't realize it's not, so I'll tie them up somewhere. Guess I'll tie them up over here today. I don't want anything sloppy hanging around. They can get snagged on something. And that's basically it. The hooking up the brake caliper and then hooking up the handle. Let me drop this down and I'll show you the controls. Okay, here are the controls that came with it. It came with grips, so I went ahead and I heated up the old grips to make them soft enough to pull off. Now I could actually still use them. Here's the brake, the new lever. It doesn't have a parking brake feature, so I'll see if I can use the old one by possibly drilling a hole and riveting it in here so it'll come down and hold that. I'll come up with something. This thing definitely needs a parking brake. And you can see these e-bike brake levers have this wire that runs up to the controller. Tells the motor to stop motoring. Right now, you can only go so far down on this curve, and it's a pretty big lever. So I mounted the throttle. This is a thumb throttle for the motor, which you can use instead of using the pedal assist sensor. Some places the throttle is not legal. It makes it a class 2 if you have both. If you have just a throttle, it's a class 3. So be mindful of your e-bike rules. If you ride it on a public trail, make sure you know what they allow and don't allow as far as motor wattage and that sort of thing. I don't know how they can tell what it is, but anyway, before you set it up with a throttle, know if you're allowed to have one. This thumb throttle is not in a good place. I can't put a grip on there and it gets in the way of the brake. I have enough brake right now, but no room for growing. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably end up getting a twist throttle. They're not very expensive and it just plugs in the same place as this. And I think that'll give me the throttle part down here out of the way and room for the brake to move. And this came with the kit, but again, you know, in hindsight, it's probably not the best option. And then the controller, I mounted it here because it mounts on that size bar, and the little piece that goes with it. I did have trouble with the brake, not so much the throttle, but the controller and the other piece, because these bars, these coated bars, I think it's this coating is very thick, and it made a difference when you get down to these aluminum brackets. It didn't want to slide on the bar. I had to spread it out. Had a hard time with it. I had a real hard time with that little dude right there. I ended up putting a torch on the plastic to soften it and squeezing it around there and getting medieval with it. But those you can mount anywhere you want. I think I want to mount mine down here in the middle. I want to put that display down there so it's in the shade so I can see it better during the day, be out of the weather. But I'll have to make a bar to mount it to, or mount it on a plate. But they're all different. The displays that I've seen are different. So I can't really tell you how to mount it. That's going to be up to you and what you get. I did notice one thing. When you get a PPV going really fast, the steering is pretty sloppy. That little bit of play right there. That's a big deal when you're doing 30, 40 miles an hour. So I'm going to see if I can do something to get the slack out of that. All right, what do you say we take it for a spin? It just started raining here, but I'm not going to let that spoil my fun. It always rains when you get something like a new motorcycle or e-bike. I've got her set on 1, and I'm starting out in 2nd gear. Now I could actually use the thumb throttle and just power with that. Brakes look both ways. Throttle only. Yes, I don't have a passenger, so we'll hear the seat rattle. Do the old elbow hold. Okay. I'm coasting. I'm going to start out pedaling. I'll feel it kick in. And all of a sudden it gets easier, even though I'm going up a hill in 2nd gear. Now I'll move it up 1. Now I'll move it up a couple. So now when it boosts, it'll boost a lot. And that's just from the pedal assist sensor. And I can use the throttle. Take it easy through here. This is on 3. We'll get around the other side and I'll take it to level 5. Alright, we're on 5. We'll just go throttle only. Get up into the driveway. Hang on. And there won't be enough room to really run it out. This thing is cooking. You'll see what I mean about that steering. It starts, that little bit of play becomes a problem. Especially trying to steer it one-handed. So there it is. Now at level 5, if you start pedaling, there's 2nd gear. A little bit of a grunt at first. Once it kicks in, it's going to take off like a rocket. People will know you're cheating when they see that. But it's quiet if I can get the seat to shut up. Take it down to level 2. Level 2 is pretty quick. It gives you a pretty good breeze. Remember, this was a 1,000-watt motor and a 10 amp hour battery, so that the battery size just determines how long it will run. And it is not a problem for this old man in 2nd gear to cruise around up this grade in level 2 with a good breeze over me because of the speed. So there you have it. A very, very rewarding job. It took a while. I did it in 1 day, but it was a very full day working out in the heat. Still need to get everything mounted. I need to get this display mounted somewhere else because it interferes with the hood, but there you have it. Thanks for watching. Now I mentioned that I had to trim off the clevis so it wouldn't hit the PAS. But there were also 3 bolts that stuck out. I wanted to mention that I had to trim those 3 bolts so that wouldn't hit the PAS. And another thing about the wheel, I mentioned how quiet it is. There's a difference between a geared motor and a non-geared motor. As far as performance, I understand they're about the same, so I would avoid the geared motor because the geared motor has that whining noise to it, that gear sound, whereas this motor is nearly silent. Just wanted to throw those things in, and thanks again for watching.